Now, that said, again, recap. This is breaking here on air. You have the latest version. You're going to go over what's in it for everybody right now. This is breaking information right now. Lord Monckton, you have the floor.
Now, what I'm going to do is to give you just that bit of the treaty which talks of part of the financial arrangement. I have never seen a treaty as expensive as this one for the West. It's only the West that's going to pay. All the third world countries have been bought, so they will sign this treaty because they think they're going to get money out of it. But it's going to cost the West a fortune. Here's what it says. Developed country parties, that's what they call countries like the United States, for instance, are going to have to pay a tax of anything up to 2% of gross national product. To give you an idea of how big that is, for instance, that's half the U.S. defense budget. That's how much they are going to confiscate to fund this vast new government that they're setting up. I haven't yet counted how many interlocked new bureaucracies there are to constitute this government, but I think it's around 700. I'm going to try and do a more exact count later. Then they're going to be levied on their greenhouse gas emissions. They're going to auction allowances to emit greenhouse gases, and if you don't buy an allowance to emit greenhouse gases, you won't be allowed to emit them. You could find that your local electricity company has to shut down because it can't afford to buy the right to emit this harmless gas into the atmosphere. There's also going to be a uniform global levy of $2 per ton of CO2 for all fossil fuel emissions. So that is really enormous. There are going to be levies on emissions from international aviation, specifically an international air passenger adaptation levy stroke green levy on every airfare, except on journeys that go in or out of poorer countries, of course. There's going to be a 2% share of the proceeds on various kinds of UN boondoggles towards giving money to third world countries. They're going to tax the money they're going to hand out. There's also going to be a global levy on international monetary transactions. That means every transfer of money across borders will be taxed. They no longer say, as they did in the original draft, what rate that tax was at, but they had in mind 2%. And that's on top of the 2% tax of GDP that they're going to charge anyway. There's also going to be, get this, penalties or fines for non-compliance of developed country parties, that's the United States, etc., with their emission reduction and financial resources commitments. That means if you don't cut your economy down to size and cut your carbon emissions, or if you don't pay the vast amounts of money that I've just read out for these various categories, which admittedly some of them are listed as options, but nevertheless we're looking at very, very serious amounts of money here, then there will be a police force, effectively. This government will have the right, for the first time ever in an international organization, to enforce its will by imposing unlimited financial penalties on any countries whose performance under this treaty they don't like. Now, I could go on and on and on and on because there's pages and pages of this. There's an adaptation fund, a multilateral adaptation fund, solidarity funds, mitigation funds, multilateral climate technology funds.
A total global government takeover. A global government, sir. Is this total global government?
This is total global government, but on a scale which is simply unimaginable. I mean, the cost of all these extra boards and panels and technology funds and this and that, that's going to come out of general taxpayers' money over and above the various individual financial provisions I've just read out. We're looking at a grab for absolute power and absolute financial control worldwide by the UN and its associated bureaucracies and 700 new bureaucracies. And I'm not talking about 700 new bureaucrats, I'm talking about 700 new bureaucratic bodies. Who says how many hundreds of thousands of staff each of those will have?
Well, briefly,
they need an awful lot of our money to pay for all that, and this is how they're going to get it. A series of funds and this and that and the other. I've never seen anything.
And global authorities over travel, tracking where everybody goes, expanding on that. Now we have the Danish leaked memo that they've been passing around, and I have that draft here. And it talks about, this is even upsetting some of the UN bureaucrats in the third world countries, that the power will be held by the IMF, the World Bank, and other quasi-private organizations. So we have a private corporate structure directly looting the population. Why is this horrifying the third world toadies that have since been taken over by the IMF and World Bank?
They want the UN to run everything because the UN they now see as simply a sort of socialist cash-generating machine, a cash cow for third world countries. The UN no longer serves any purpose except first its own enrichment and then a little bit of trickle-down after it's spent all that it wants on its own vast bureaucracies. And you know, there are 200 of those already, at least 200, represented here at this conference. Unbelievable alphabet soup of acronyms for these different, UNEPs and WMOs and WFFs and this and that, hundreds of them. And all of that being paid for almost entirely by the taxpayers of the West and occasionally letting some money trickle down to third world countries whose leaders, therefore, want to get this money for their own Swiss bank accounts. And they look to the UN as simply another source of cash. And so they're trying to buy, the UN is trying to buy these third world countries by saying, well, we're going to really make the developed countries pay. And the reason the third world countries are now so annoyed with the Danish draft, which was simply intended to try and facilitate agreement, but it got out into the Guardian before it had done its job, and therefore the Guardian has rather blown the negotiations out into the open. The reason why the third world countries are annoyed about this is because it isn't their friend, the UN, that will be running things. It's the much stiffer, much more business-like World Bank and IMF. Now, of course, the trouble is that from the point of view of Western countries, whether it's the UN or the World Bank and the IMF that's running this world government, one astonishing characteristic, and I've looked right through this treaty and I can confirm this is just the same as in the previous draft, the word election, democracy, ballot, vote, does not appear anywhere. The one thing that's quite clear is that these enormous powers of taxation and interference, enormous powers of levying this and taxing that and funding the other, are all going to be without any representation at all. Now, the old principle, as you know well, on which the U.S. Constitution is founded, is that there should be no taxation of any citizen unless the body taxing that citizen represents that citizen by being elected by him. No taxation without representation, it's called. But this world climate body, this world government, is not going to be elected by anyone. It's going to be a self-appointed, self-perpetuating bureaucracy, just like the EU commissars who now run the European Union and make 90% of our laws. We have a parliament, of course. It's more or less completely redundant. We might as well let it go into the Thames. But they're now trying to use that model and have it on an international scale with no election, no ballot, no vote, no right to call these people to account, no right to question them, no right to remove them, no right to replace them. This is
when the United Nations,
democracy worldwide.
So when the United Nations says this is the greatest moment for world government, this is the year of the establishment of global governance, as the head of the EU and as Ban Ki-moon, the head of the UN Secretary General, has said, they really mean it.